The Fall of Eternity. Era of Diabolos, Age of Raken, year 670. Prologue. In the realm of Terrapeccatus, demons reigned supreme. At the behest of the Demon King, 12 noble houses ruled the many regions of this realm. Some houses held control through domination and military might. Others did so through the employment of powerful hereditary magic. House Perpetuum was one of those magical houses. Once the most powerful house in all Terrapeccatus, the great fall of Perpetuum 1,000 years ago saw them pushed back to all but the last vestiges of their territory. Now, the quiet mountains of Inmornahe in the far northeast are all this once great house has left. For the last millennium, House Perpetuum's casters and the legendary Spellweaver Council have studied and perfected their powerful summoning and teleportation magic. Isolationist after the fall, this house refused any attempts from the larger military houses to share this magical power through marriage, and while this refusal was often met with disdain by the greedy houses outside, the mountains surrounding the Perpetuum Keep, filled to the brim with summoned stone Goliaths and teleportation runes, kept any invader far from the old house. That was, until they were betrayed by one of their own. For reasons unknown, Spellweaver Sargal of the Spellweaver Council betrayed his people and guided House Imperiosus through the labyrinthian mountain pass, right to Perpetuum's doorstep. With the traitor's guidance, Imperiosus has come to finish what began all those years ago. Act 1. Pyrite tightened his grip on his bloodstained glaive. The bridge connecting the Perpetuum Keep to the mountain pass stretched out before him. It wasn't a particularly large bridge, but that was by design. When the vanguard of House Imperiosus had attacked, they had to funnel in to cross the near bottomless pit the bridge spanned. Now, the 50 or so legionaries littered the black brick.
"That seemed too easy,"
said Spellweaver Osgodoth as he walked up beside Pyrite. His purple hooded robes embroidered with the silver of Perpetuum covered his wrinkled features. The towering stone behemoth he had summoned stomped past them. It returned to the head of the bridge, its club-like arms stained with Imperiosus blood. It was joined by 4 considerably smaller stone Goliaths. Pyrite cast him a sidelong glance. That was only their vanguard. Auxiliaries, most likely. They were probing us. Probably wanted to see if we would just surrender, Pyrite told the ancient demon. Osgodoth was a powerful caster, and he was fairly well-traveled, but he lacked knowledge of battle. He had, however, been the only one from the Spellweaver Council to volunteer to help defend the keep. The rest of them were busy evacuating the house's denizens via ritual teleportation. Osgodoth looked at the bodies lying motionless on the bridge.
"But if that was merely a probing attack, why did they not retreat when they realized they could not win?"
Pyrite glanced past the bridge at the path beyond. He saw one of his fellow mercenaries approaching. Because they knew a worse fate awaited them, had they done so. Osgodoth shuddered at the thought.
"To be able to spend lives so needlessly,"
he breathed. The armored demon ran up to the pair.
"Pyrite, they're coming. At least 10,000 by my count,"
came a breathless female voice from beneath the visored helmet. Raising the visor, she added,
"Lord Segred is leading them."
A nervous chill ran through Pyrite, and his eyes grew wide. Osgodoth looked between the pair, confused.
What? What does that mean?"
Pyrite gave a long breath out. "If Lord Segred Imperiosus is here personally, then I don't think we can possibly win this." Osgodoth bristled. He wheeled on Pyrite and grabbed him by the gorget that sat around his neck.
"So you would simply surrender? I thought better of you,
Pyrite glared down at the smaller demon. "Keep your voice down, Spellweaver. I never said anything about surrender." Osgodoth released his grip and backed up a few steps.
"Forgive me, Pyrrhus.
He began. "My name is Pyrite." The Spellweaver looked at him for a few seconds before continuing.
"Yes. Well, what's our plan if we can't win?"
Pyrite turned away from him and examined the forces he had at his disposal. 1 stone behemoth and 4 stone Goliaths stood shoulder to shoulder at the head of the bridge. They were so still that had he not known any better, he would have guessed their roughly sculpted rock forms were a poor excuse for statues. Behind them, the Perpetuum Guard were recovering from the initial engagement. They numbered only 30, a testament to the disdain the house held for the barbaric military arts. 10 gargoyles lined the side of the bridge, 5 on each side, built directly into the architecture. And finally, a ways behind the mouth of the bridge, stood the volunteer casters. Numbering 12, there were 10 summoners, from whom the Goliaths had come, and 2 evocationists. Pyrite glanced at the female demon who awaited his word. Anid, did you see any casters among the invaders?
I couldn't get close enough to count them, but I saw a few hoods in the ranks. Archers, too.
Pyrite turned toward the bridge and raised his voice to a shout. Listen up! Every horned head in attendance turned to him. Warriors, form shield wall, 20 steps behind the summons. 10 wide, 3 deep. Keep the ranks tight. Go! The guards jumped to their feet and ran to their places. Pyrite turned to the casters. Evocationists, you're our firepower. Stay with Osgaroth and smash their lines for us. Just don't hit us in the back. Summoners, stay together and find cover. The moment a Goliath goes down, I want another one ready to take its place. The 2 evocationists ran to join Osgaroth, while the summoners found cover behind a rock face. Osgaroth nodded to the 2 casters who joined him, and looked back at Pyrite.
And what about me?
Pyrite met his gaze and smiled. Your job is the most important. Pyrite stood just in front of the wall of tower shields. On the right side of the formation stood Anid, her spear in hand. On the left was Daran, the 3rd and last member of Squad Pyrite. They were to ensure the corners of the formation didn't fall, while he would hold the center. Such a ragtag band we are, Pyrite thought as he looked at his squad mates and the forces they led. Why they followed him he never could figure out, but they did nonetheless. May we all survive this. With a sigh, he looked forward. He could hear it. The marching. The first row of Imperiosus soldiers rounded the corner and stepped into view. They were followed by another row, and then another, until the path was filled with armored demons in perfect formation, shields at their sides and weapons still sheathed. The wall of invaders marched forward endlessly from the mountain pass. The officers, mounted on nightmares, rode alongside their soldiers. While the individual Imperiosus legionary was never too impressively powerful, it was their sheer numbers and instinctual discipline that made them such a great threat. The demons behind Pyrite were realizing that firsthand. Even now, before their enemy was at the other end of the bridge, he could hear them muttering behind him. Both awe and fear gripped them. Pyrite turned and faced his forces. Hear me, brothers and sisters! These invaders are many, I'll give them that. But it is not numbers that will decide victory this day. Are we going to roll over and give in because our foe is many? Are we going to let them march into our home and slaughter our people? Murmurs of defiant anger rippled through the ranks. Pyrite raised his glaive, and the Perpetuum banner manifested upon its haft, unfurling and flying in the frigid mountain wind. Look to our banner and remember who we are! We are House Perpetuum! We are the bulwark that has stood since the dawn of time! We are those who stood against the gods themselves! And these invaders think to attack us with their numbers? They think that will be enough? He pointed his glaive at the oncoming legion. They will rue the day they delivered our vengeance to us! They will look back on this day with fear and shame! It is here we make our stand and show these invaders why we are called eternal! Cheers erupted and sword blades slammed against shields in thunderous applause. Pyrite noticed Anid giving him a thumbs up with a wry smirk on her face. Smartass. Pyrite gave her a wink and turned back to the enemy. They had reached the bridge and, in perfect order, switched from march columns to rows of battle. He looked past the stone construct standing between the 2 armies and watched as the enemy formed rows 10 wide and hundreds deep. Finally, they drew blades and marched forth. Suddenly, there was a percussive crack as bowstrings loosed, and Pyrite looked to see a cloud of arrows rise high into the sky. Shields up! Pyrite shouted. The front row of shields slammed into the brick, reforming the wall that had faltered during the cheering. The back ranks raised their shields above their comrades before them, presenting a solid sheet of protection overhead. Daran raised his shield, Anid closed her visor, and Pyrite manifested his helmet. They fell like rain. Hundreds of arrows slammed into the raised shields, biting into the darkwood. A few deflected off of Pyrite's armor, showering the forces behind him in sparks, but he didn't flinch. Osgodoth, give him a proper Perpetuum welcome, Pyrite thought.
As you wish, lad,
the Spellweaver replied telepathically. 3 fireballs, one considerably larger than the others, shot out from behind the Perpetuum line. They soared overhead in an arc, and the invaders raised shields in vain. The flames fell upon them and exploded, sending the front ranks flying outwards. Those on the flanks of the formation were sent careening over the edge and fell screaming into the pit below. The legionaries who weren't killed on impact cried in agony as their armor melted to their skin. 2 officers who had survived the blast began shouting orders from atop their demonic steeds. Pyrite looked at Aenid, who nodded back. He poured his meager magical power into his weapon, and the broad-bladed head reformed into a long-winged spear. Turning his weapon over in his hand, he and Aenid reached back as far as their armored forms would permit. In unison, they took a step forward, their steel-plated boots cracking the brick underfoot. And then, they threw. The spears rocketed forth, flying between the Goliaths and Behemoth and into the officers. The pair were carried off their mounts and pinned to the brick beneath them. They hadn't even had time to scream. Pyrite manifested a new glaive, as well as a spear which he threw to Aenid. He looked back to Osgodoth. Their front line is broken. Send them in and start targeting their archers. The Spellweaver gave a telepathic grunt of affirmation, and the statue-like constructs moved forward. Led by the Behemoth, they gradually increased in speed until they reached an earth-shattering jog. The bridge shook beneath Pyrite's feet with every step the giant elementals took. The invaders saw the lumbering rock forms barreling toward them and formed the best shield wall they could manage. It mattered as little as it had against the fireballs. Once again, the front line shattered, crushed under stone feet as first the Behemoth and then the Goliaths smashed through the line. The Behemoth came to a slow halt and swept its club-like arms through the legionaries, sending them flying back into their own formation, their screams drowned out by the smashing of stone arms on black brick and the marching of boots. A second trifecta of fireballs soared overhead and landed in the enemy's rear lines. They exploded and sent charred demons flying into the rock walls that they hid beside. Keep at it, Spellweaver, Pyrite thought. Osgodoth did not entertain a reply, likely busy evoking a new ball of fire. That was fine, though, as Pyrite had his own problems to deal with. Stragglers, legionaries who had managed to get past the constructs, started to filter through the stone grinder and charge the Perpetuum line. Pyrite readied his glaive as one of them ran toward him. The demon put his shield in front of him and tried to ram into Pyrite. Pyrite stepped out of the way and swept his glaive low, catching the armored legs of the invader and sending him falling forward. He gave a screech of surprise and fury as he fell onto his shield, skidding to a halt before the Perpetuum formation. Desperately, the invader tried to swing at Pyrite from his prone position, but Pyrite stomped on his arm, pinning it in place. Pyrite glared down at him, demonic energy flowing from the eye slits on his helmet. With the butt spike of his weapon, he plunged it into the back of the demon's neck, killing him. Just as he retracted his glaive, another 3 invaders reached him. Together, they swung at him, converging from left, right, and above all at once. Pyrite caught 2 of the blows on his glaive, one on the blade and one on the lower haft. He blocked the last with his left vambrace, the blade biting into his armor. With a grunt, he shoved the 2 on his right back and swung his glaive around, slamming the blade into the armored head of the remaining invader. The demon rocked back, stunned by the blow, and lowered his shield just enough. Pyrite swung again. This time his glaive bit into the unarmored skin of the invader's neck. It cleaved through with little resistance, and the demon fell to the brick, head rolling away. Pyrite turned to face the 2 others, but found them being cut down by the Perpetuum guards. He gave silent thanks to them and refocused on another invader charging him. With shield raised, the invader also attempted to ram into him. Pyrite slammed his glaive down from above, and it dug into the dark wood. The force of the impact staggered the demon, and with one motion, Pyrite wrenched his weapon free and spun it. The back haft caught the side of the shield and forced it away. Pyrite continued the swing and decapitated the now vulnerable legionary. With a moment to breathe, Pyrite looked around and took stock. He saw his squad mates finishing off their respective opponents. The rest of the formation was embroiled in battle, but from where Pyrite stood, it seemed to be going in their favor. He was impressed. He hadn't really expected the inexperienced Perpetuum guards to hold so well against Imperiosus legionaries. Suddenly, the ground shook, and a massive boom sounded from further along the bridge. Pyrite looked and saw that one of the Goliaths had crashed to the black brick. toppled by the hundreds of fighters that surrounded and clung to it. There was a sudden and short outpouring of blue energy, and Pyrite knew it was dead, its core destroyed. The rest of the summons fought on, sending swaths of soldiers flying off the sides of the bridge or crushing them into it. But they were battered. Entire chunks of their stone skin had been smashed to dust by the endless onslaught of Imperiosus blades. The behemoth, in particular, was crawling with demons that looked like insects crawling on a carcass. They hammered at its chest with heavy spiked pommels, trying to chip away enough stone to expose its core. "We can't lose the behemoth," Pyrite thought. He knew Osgodoth wouldn't have the mana necessary to summon another. "Dadan!" Pyrite shouted above the chaos. He found his companion pulling his sword from a dead legionary. The demon turned his head to look at him. "Take command of the front! I'm going to help the behemoth!" Dadan nodded and quickly turned back to the fight as another enemy charged him. Confident Dadan would handle it, Pyrite took off for the summons. Another Goliath fell, and its core was quickly destroyed, releasing an outcry of magical energy. As Pyrite ran, more invaders tried to intercept him, and he readied himself to meet them. A large stone arm swung over his head and crushed the enemies into the brick. Pyrite looked back and was greeted by a newly summoned Goliath. He noticed the formation closing the hole that was made for the elemental to pass through. The Goliath lowered a club-like arm toward him, and he climbed on. It raised him up to its shoulder and continued its lumbering run toward the enemy. Pyrite held on to the misshapen boulder that made up its head as it picked up speed. As they reached the line, the Goliath lowered its arm as a ram and smashed into the backs of the invaders who surrounded the rest of its embattled brothers. Pyrite leapt from the Goliath, passed over the heated battle below, and landed on the behemoth. As he did, he brought his glaive down on one of the many demons who clung to it. The weapon caved in the demon's helmet, crushing his skull and mangling the blade. The demon fell to the ground and was crushed under stone foot. Pyrite imbued his damaged weapon with magical energy, and the blade straightened, returning to its razor-sharp form. And then he got to work. Like swatting carrion flies, Pyrite swung and stabbed at the invaders, sending them falling to the ground below. Slowly, he cleared the behemoth of attackers. Suddenly, a blindingly bright flash ripped across the battlefield, heading straight for him. He saw it coming only a split second before the electrical blast blinded and smashed into him. Thunder shook the air around him. He was thrown off the behemoth and into the raised edge of the bridge before, at last, the magical blast subsided. Pyrite let out a deep breath and pushed himself up with his glaive. A runic talisman of magical protection, interwoven into the lamellar plates that made up his chest armor, fizzled and burned out. He tried to ignore the ringing in his ears and searched the cliffs on the other side of the valley. A group of Imperiosus legionaries ran at him, but they were smacked away by one of the Goliaths, who now formed a circle of protection around him. Finally, he found them. The team of casters he had been waiting for, 20 or so by his quick count, stood together and began flinging fireballs at the Goliaths. The uncaring flames consumed friend and foe alike. One of the Goliaths, the one who had carried him, was hit in the chest and magical energy exploded out. It fell to the ground, crushing the enemy beneath it. Pyrite knew that House Imperiosus would keep their casters together, in one easily controlled group. They always did. In matters of march and discipline they were unmatched, but they were not a magic house. They used casters as batteries of concentrated firepower, and cared little whether or not those casters were actually suited to offensive forms of magic. These were all the casters Lord Segred had brought. If they had any who were skilled in the schools of transmutation or conjuration, they would be in this group. And that was what Pyrite was betting on. Pyrite stood up straight and shouted, his voice rising above the intense melee. "Gargoyles!" The statues along the edge of the bridge began to tremble, little cracks forming on their heads, until, at last, the stone broke, and their heads snapped around to look at him. Pyrite pointed at the casters with his glaive and uttered the order. "Kill them!" The gargoyles looked from his weapon to their prey. Once their beady red eyes locked onto their target, the stone that surrounded the rest of their bodies began to tremble, falling away in chunks. Red leathery wings stretched out, and with a heavy beat, the 10 creatures lifted off into the air and bore down on their targets. As they converged, fireballs and lightning blasts were hastily shot toward them. The blasts slammed into them, but the gargoyles shrugged them off, having taken little damage, their magic-resistant skin allowing them to cross the distance. Like ravenous birds of prey, they landed on the casters and began to tear into them. Suddenly, there was a massive explosion on the cliffside. It stained the entire battlefield a deep orange and sent sheets of rock tumbling down into the black abyss. A self-destruct spell, Pyrite concluded. Even despite the gargoyles' natural resistance, they likely wouldn't have survived that blast. But the gargoyles had done their job, and, thanks to them, House Perpetuum had a chance. Pyrite turned his attention back to the innumerable enemy before him. The two remaining Goliaths that protected him smashed the legionaries surrounding them. The behemoth was ringed with slain invaders, their armored forms bent at terrible angles. Despite this, the legion continued their attack, trampling over their fallen comrades and leaping onto the great stone elemental. Pyrite left the protection of the Goliaths and ran to help the behemoth. The Goliaths, noticing his intent, cleared a path with sweeping club-like arms. One legionary, with different armor from the rest, chain rather than segmented plate, avoided the blow and came at him. The invader swung, his blade sweeping flat. Pyrite raised his glaive to guard. The metal blade gave a loud crack as it bit into the darkwood haft of the polearm. Pyrite shoved out with the weapon, pushing the blade off, and realized his mistake. The legionary let the momentum carry his blade back, redirecting it so that it swung down on the opposite side. Pyrite tried to bring his glaive around, but he was too slow, and the blow smashed into his gorget, denting it into the padded coat he wore beneath. Pyrite groaned as pain from the blow radiated out from the quickly bruising spot. The invader reached back with his shield and plunged the bottom of it into Pyrite's helmet like a spear. Pyrite fell back, dazed, his vision blurry. What he could see through the eye slits of his helmet was the dark sky above. Finally, he realized he was on his back. He turned his head to see the legs of his attacker approaching. He gripped the haft of his glaive, gave silent thanks that he hadn't let go of it, and swung. The curved blade streaked for the armored shins. Right as it was about to reach the target, the invader slammed his shield into the black brick, catching it. Pyrite, one hand still gripping the glaive and his other planted firmly on the brick, got his feet beneath him and stood up. He spun his glaive first back and then overhead, bringing it down toward the crested head of the enemy, whom he now realized was a centurion. The centurion raised his shield and caught the glaive once again. As it collided, though, Pyrite suffused the weapon with magical energy, and the blade deformed, curling into a hook-like shape over the top of the shield. He yanked, and the hooked blade dug into the back of the shield, pulling it and the centurion forward. The centurion released his grip and raised his blade high before bringing it down. Pyrite ripped the hooked glaive from the shield as it fell to his feet. He spun the weapon in front of him, deflecting the incoming blade away. He saw the red eyes of the centurion go wide from beneath his helmet as the demon realized his mistake. Pyrite plunged the butt spike of his weapon into the unprotected throat of the centurion. The demon grabbed the staff protruding from his throat and spat up blood. For a moment, he glared at Pyrite before his eyes went dim and his arm limp. Pyrite pulled the polearm free and reformed its blade. He looked around and was pleased to see that two new Goliaths had joined the melee and, together with their fellow summons, had re-established the front line. No wonder we weren't interrupted, he thought as he glanced at the dead centurion. He took a deep breath and looked back at the Perpetuum line. They had taken serious losses in his absence. The first rank of 10 demons had fallen, and roughly half of the second as well. It seemed, judging by the number of Imperiosus bodies lying before them, that quite a lot of the invaders had gotten past the summons when the elemental line had faltered. Nonetheless, they would hold, for now. Pyrite turned his attention back to the enemy before him, searching through the endless tide of uniformed foes. Lord Sigurd was still nowhere to be found. Bastard, Pyrite thought. He had wanted to wait until Sigurd was on the bridge to enact his plan, hoping the Lord would get involved once he saw his forces weren't making sufficient progress. Evidently, he had misjudged the Lord's patience. Pyrite considered his options and decided. Osgaroth, he said telepathically.
Is it time, lad?
The spellweaver returned. Before Pyrite could answer, a thunderous boom rang out through the entire mountain range. It sounded distant, but it had shaken the bridge beneath his feet. Pyrite looked in the direction of the sound. What? He fell silent as he heard the waxing whistle and saw the black objects flying toward him. Just before impact, a giant stone arm thrust in front of him, and in the next moment, exploded. Knives of rock slammed into him, finding gaps in his armor and plunging deep into his flesh. A larger stone smashed into his chest and sent him flying back. As he flew, time seemed to slow. In a moment of confused clarity, he wondered what had just happened. Was it more casters? Had Sigurd separated them after all? Was he about to die? Had they just lost? Finally, his back hit solid brick, and he skidded. Sparks leapt from the shrieking metal of his lamellar back armor before he slammed into the edge of the bridge and lost consciousness. When Pyrite's eyes opened, two things hit him in sequence. First was the searing pain all throughout his body. The second was the agony-filled screams of demons dying. His helmet was gone, and Dadan knelt above him, wrapping bandages around his bleeding arm. Above him, a series of fireballs sailed over, exploding soon after. Pyrite got up, pushed the protesting Dadan back, and saw chaos before him. He had awoken behind the dwindling Perpetuum line, which was being overrun by Imperiosus soldiers. He watched as the remaining stalwart defenders were slaughtered. The entire bridge was filled with invaders. The behemoth stood alone, crawling with armored bodies that slammed pommels into its chest, searching for its core. One of its club-like arms was gone. Pyrite looked at Dadan. "We need more Goliaths!" Dadan looked past him and pointed. The summoners are dead. They were hit in the first salvo from the cannons." He shouted above the chaos. An incoming arrow ricocheted off his shield, and he flinched in surprise. Pyrite turned and saw the collapsed rock face far behind their line. It was then that he processed what his comrade had said. Cannons?
House Imperiosus cannons. I'm sorry, Pyrite. I didn't see them.
Anid shouted as she joined the two. She shook blood from her sword, her spear long since broken. Pyrite looked back at the writhing bridge, fully realizing the direness of their situation. "Osgaroth! Destroy the bridge, now!" he shouted, both telepathically and out loud.
Understood.
The three watched as the behemoth, whose stone skin looked black under the bodies that clung to it, reached back with its one arm and brought it down. The entire mountainside shook. Fighting stopped. All eyes turned to the elemental. Again, it raised its arm, and again it slammed it down. A massive crack splintered through the black brick structure. A third time, it raised its arm. But this time, the crack came before it brought it down. 3 cannonballs slammed into the behemoth. Chunks of stone fell from its chest as it stumbled back, lumbering stone leg over stone leg, until it hit the raised edge of the bridge and fell over the side. The screams of those invaders still clinging to it echoed up from the pit. At last, silence fell over the battlefield. Pyrite forced himself to breathe. It was over. He had failed. A trumpet call sounded through the mountain pass, cutting the silence like a blade. All at once, as though possessed by a single mind, the tide of legionaries parted down the middle of the bridge. Even the dead were dragged from the opening. Pyrite looked on with renewed horror as Lord Xaramaliss Imperiosus, mounted atop a nightmare, rode on to the black brick. His 4 heavily armored honor guard walked alongside him, their cloaks billowing out behind them. Each gripped ornamented great axes and wore skull masks, marking their status. One of them, the largest, wore blood-red scale armor.
Is that?
Osgaroth asked as he and his evocationist joined the mercenaries. Pyrite didn't even look at him. His fuming gaze was locked on his target. He gripped his glaive, imbuing it with magic once more.
Spellweaver, throw everything you have at that bastard.
His words came as little more than a whisper. His glaive's curved head had reformed into a spear point, and in his other hand, a new spear assembled itself. Osgaroth nodded, and he and his casters turned toward one another. Holding out their hands, a ball of flame ignited between them. The 3 casters stepped toward each other, muttering incantations in unison, and the flames began to spin and condense, forced inward. Gusts of wind were sucked in to feed the ravenous flames as sparks began to erupt from the shrinking orb. It turned from orange to blue, then purple. Finally, they raised their hands, and the ball obeyed, rising above them. As it rose, so did their voices. They shouted the final magical word, and the ball of furious light ripped from their arcane grasp, shooting toward the oncoming lord. It slammed into the approaching demons and erupted, purple light exploded out, throwing those legionaries near their lord off the edge of the bridge. Electrical arcs spidered from the blast, jumping from invader to invader, frying them in their armor. As the smoke cleared, they saw the foremost honor guard lower his braced arm, the runic talisman forged into his vambrace smoldering. Lord Segrid and his honor guard were unharmed. Pyrite and Enid, with her fresh spear in hand, reached back and aimed for the chest of the lord just past the honor guard. Together, they stepped forward, stone cracking underfoot, and through. Even faster than the ball of plasma before, the spears streaked through the still ionized air until they reached their target and stopped. Pyrite's breath caught in his throat. He looked from the immobile spears to the two honor guard holding them just inches from their lord's chestplate. Without a thought, they crushed the hafts and tossed them aside. Pyrite looked at what remained. All that he had left were those standing with him now. "Forgive me," he said. He manifested a new glaive and looked at his comrades. "Shall we then?" He noticed them exchanging looks of resigned acceptance. Osgodath stepped toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder.
You have nothing to apologize for, lad.
Pyrite looked from the hand to the ancient demon.
But it is not your fate to die here.
Pyrite looked at Duran and Enid. "What are you?" Duran held his gaze and said, "These casters won't last a second without a vanguard. We'll take down as many as we can, boss." His eyes showed worry behind his determination.
Thank you for everything, Pyrite.
Enid added, a slight quiver in her voice. Realization dawned on Pyrite as he felt the magical energy flaring in Osgodath's hand. "No, Oz, don't!" Pyrite reached out, but it was too late. He was no longer on the bridge. Around him was the grand foyer of Perpetuum Keep.
Protect the matriarch. It's been an honor, lad.